Thank you, Pastor, and good morning, everyone. It's a great Sabbath to be here, isn't it? Kathy and I feel it's a great privilege to be in the Northwest, and I think it's even greater to see there are faithful people that are interested in spiritual things on Sabbath. We have a heritage here. My father was in the logging business, and we did logging, timber cutting and falling and bucking and so on for many years. As a young man growing up, in fact, even after I went to college, even after I got married, we worked together in the woods for a while. So I always like Kathy to see these big fir trees. Back east, we have mostly deciduous trees, although we do have some eastern hemlock and white pine and other softwoods as well. But it's nice to smell fir again, isn't it? You guys get to do it all the time. But anyway, there's one thing that when we get to heaven, that when you see the Spirit of Prophecy talking about the heavenly homes, it says there'll be lofty trees and mountains. I like that idea. Maybe even trains. What I'm going to share with you today is kind of an update of end times. And there's a lot of things happening, but before I get started, I want to have another prayer again. But most of you found a little brochure like this on your seat when you came in today. And I just want to spend 1 minute on this because it's very amazing. Adventist World Radio is the gospel mission radio program of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, and it has an impact around the world. I can tell you right now that there's no place, including right here, that you could not access Adventist World Radio. The whole earth is covered with radio waves. It's really, really incredible. I was interested in Adventist World Radio for two reasons. One is that it was radio that brought my family into the Adventist Church, and I'll just tell you, since some of you travel I-5, if you go down I-5 through Oregon, and the very first exit you come to in California is Hilt. Everybody ever see the Hilt exit? My family was living there when I was a little boy, 2 years old, 3 years old, and my father was driving logging truck for the Fruit Growers Supply Company there. I think it's a ghost town now, but anyway, it was big days in those days. And he would work 6 days a week, including Sabbath. And on Sunday morning was the only time he was home, and we would listen to a little radio on our kitchen table, and we would hear Voice of Prophecy. Mother tuned to that for some reason. The amazing thing about it is, she sent off for the Bible course, and my parents took the Bible course, and one of my earliest childhood memories is seeing my parents baptized in the Klamath River in Northern California because of radio. So I happen to be a ham radio operator as well, so I can just tell you in my station, I haven't had it on the air for a while, but I still have all the equipment. But I have shortwave radio set with full legal power that all the amateur can have, and that is 2,000 peak envelope power of my linear amplifier. And that's big news. I mean, if you're a ham radio operator and somebody with that kind of power breaks in, you listen to them. But in this particular case, Adventist World Radio has a flagship station on the island of Guam that has shortwave antennas that are peaked perfectly, huge curtain antennas that cover all of the 1040 window, and this is incredible, with 100,000 watts of shortwave power. Incredible. And many of the people in China and other places where this goes, 31 languages in shortwave goes from those transmitters on Guam, the flagship station. Pretty interesting. And I will just tell you that we do FM radio in the big cities of the world and also AM, FM transmissions, but I want to share one thing with you. Radio is very unusual in that there are no borders. People wonder how it goes up, but I'll just tell you that I know this from being a ham radio operator, that when you transmit your signal, it doesn't go line of sight like FM does. It goes up to the ionosphere and then comes down like rain all over the place where the end of it is. So we can get into Nepal and Tibet and all these places in the mountains. It's incredible. People listen to Adventist World Radio. But I just want to quickly tell you that since 2010, when the General Conference session was in Atlanta, Adventist World Radio decided to also use the internet, which brings us into the, what are we, the 21st century? Anyway, we've contracted with a company named Mediator, which takes the 30-minute radio programs that we put up on the air all over the world in different languages. 100 languages, by the way, which is amazing. All the major languages of the earth are on Adventist World Radio. But the amazing thing is they've digitized them and put them now on the internet, so you can download 30-minute programs. You just go awr.org and it says, what language do you prefer? And you can choose any language. Even if your neighbor's from another country, you can tell them about this. But I would just tell you that As of right now, I was on 3ABN just a few months ago. I think it was June at the camp meeting there. And so I got the latest statistics, and 30-minute programs are being downloaded off the internet, our website, at the rate of 57 of them every second, which means more than 5,000 people download 30-minute programs every day. Did I say 5,000? The answer is 5 million. 5 million every day. And more than half of them are downloaded in the Mandarin Chinese language, which is really incredible. The second most downloaded language is the Arabic languages, Farsi and other languages, because people in these countries are just eager for the soaking up the gospel, as you can imagine. And they are listening to Adventist World Radio. The radio is so neat because if I was listening in a country that forbid religious broadcasting, if I was watching TV, people would hear the flicker of the TV or see it through the passing by. But if I have my earbuds on, I'm listening to Adventist World Radio, riding my bike down the streets of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Nobody knows what I'm listening to. They think it might be rock music. I've got a big smile on my face. You understand? They're listening to Adventist World Radio. So I just want you to show that there's no borders, no government restrictions, no cultural opposition. Even if you're illiterate, you can't read, you can listen to the Word of God in your own language, which is pretty amazing. So there's no limits at all, and God is blessing in a mighty way. And I'll tell you a couple of stories later today when I share with you a little bit more. Most of you know that the 1040 window is the area that's 10 degrees above the equator to 40 degrees above the equator, and covers from Eastern Europe across North Africa and clear over through Asia and so on. 2/3 of Earth's population live there, and only about 3% are Christians at all. All three of the major non-Christian religions have their headquarters there. I'll also tell you that this is an interesting concentration of people living in poverty, because it just happens that the poorest people in the world also live there. We're seeing people talk about country living. This is kind of neat out here, of course. But are you aware that there are, 13 cities in the world that have more than 20 million people in them? Tokyo, Japan has 37 million people in that one city. And there are other many cities like that. I just will tell you something interesting, that Dwayne McKee, who's just become the president of Adventist World Radio, was and still is in charge of the total member involvement worldwide of the Adventist Church. And it's incredible that they've just held meetings in the Philippines. And I want you to listen carefully to this. They got 50 pastors from Japan to come and hold evangelistic meetings in the Philippines. And it's the first time they'd ever held evangelistic meetings at all. And to see people come forward and give their lives to Christ and be baptized was just amazing. The reason they did that is because next year the main thrust, like it was in Rwanda and Tanzania and other places, and then Eastern Europe recently, next year the big thrust will be, believe it or not, Japan. And these men will be the first time they've ever held evangelistic meetings in their own country. Pretty amazing. I mean, you can just imagine what will happen over there. Okay, what I'm going to talk to you about today is for such a time as this, and it's an amazing time to be alive. I remember years ago, one of the logging contracts we had was in the Fort Apache Indian Reservation in Arizona. And I have two brothers at that time. I have three brothers now, but one of them wasn't in school yet. But the three brothers and I attended the White River Apache Indian School. There were 700 Apaches, and we were the only three white kids there. We never suggested cowboys and Indians, if you can imagine that. At any rate, the reason I'm telling you that is there's people all over the world that need to hear the message, wherever we are, and there's always a way that we can share the message. But about 470 years before the time of Christ, there was this very serious crisis for God's chosen people, the children of Israel. Just a very small remnant, as you can remember, returned to their homeland to restore and to rebuild it. But the majority of God's people were still living in Persia, the old land of the Babylonians, where they had been taken captive centuries before. And I want you to listen to the many parallels that I'll share with you today as we introduce this particular topic. In an attempt to destroy God's people, Satan had instilled jealousy and hatred in the hearts and minds of the Persian people. And though they could not see it coming, listen carefully. Most of you know I choose my words very carefully, and I want you to understand this. Though they could not see it coming, God's people would soon face a death decree that would annihilate them from the face of the earth. In this period of developing crisis, God had providentially placed a young Jewish girl named Hadassah. She is known to most of us by her Persian name, Esther. The Lord foresaw the troublous times that were to follow during the reign of Xerxes. He's the Ahasuerus of the book of Esther. And in his providence, in God's providence, he directed events that placed Esther in the position of the queen of Persia. Now, Esther was an unlikely person to do anything great for God, as you can imagine. Both of her parents had died when she was a young girl. This orphan girl was taken in and raised by her older cousin Mordecai. And in addition to this abnormal family situation, she was a Jew, part of the hated minority, and a Sabbath keeper. And now all of a sudden she's the queen of Persia. You remember this unusual situation. Now we must understand something interesting, and that is just because God puts someone in a position and offers them an opportunity, it doesn't mean they have to do it. Does everybody understand that? It's pretty interesting. So we're going to learn some important lessons from the story of Esther. And when she was there in the palace, she was written to by her cousin Mordecai, and he said this. Most of you know it. I have my Bible up here, but I have the text on the screen so you'll be able to see them. Esther 4 and verses 13 and 14. Do not think, he wrote to her, in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And so I'm thinking about that for each one of us. It's important that we understand how important it is. So in chapter 49 of Book Prophets and Kings, Ellen White draws many parallels between the work of Esther and that part of God's people who are living in the last days, and that, of course, would be us. So I'm going to tell you, how many points do you think I'm going to give you? 7. Okay, here they are. In God's big picture, things don't just happen by chance. So we don't say good luck, we say God bless you, all right? So I found this from Christ's Object Lessons, page 326. Not more surely is the place prepared for us in the heavenly mansions than is the special place designated on earth where we are to work for God. So you want a place in heaven? Hunt for your place down here. You know, get the point? So another one, he's called each of us for such a time as this. And it's a time when the great prophetic timeline has literally run out. I don't want to be more specific than I was last night, but if anybody has, a little bit of thinking powers, and I guess all of you do, you know that we're very near the end. Does that make sense? Okay. 1798 was the time of the end. 1844, the untypical day of atonement. Now, another thing is interesting is that it is a time when knowledge has increased in prophetic understanding. Unlike the times of our S-Day pioneers, we now have the tremendous array of technological communication tools. When the Adventist Church was organized in 1863, there was no internet, no cell phones, no radio, no television, no media at all, except print. You understand? Now, this is amazing. When people were in Europe, like when J.N. Andrews went to Europe, if he wrote a letter back to America, it took at least 2 weeks, the minimum time to get to where it was going. We write letters from Tennessee to California. It gets there sometimes the next day and almost always in 2 days. And this is the poor U.S. postal system. You understand? But they took the challenge. The young people did. We're going to do this. It's a time of chronic wars and terrorism. The Bible talks about wars in Matthew 24 and Mark the 13th chapter and Luke 21, and it all says something amazing. And that is, when the wars happen, the end is not yet. And these are the beginning of sorrows. And then it says, but the end will not come immediately when these big wars come. The last century has seen more wars than any century in Earth's history. More people were killed, and I think I mentioned this to you last night briefly, but the last century has been the bloodiest of all time. As a matter of fact, starting in August the 8th, this month is a centennial, of course, of that, or at least an anniversary. Over 100,000 people were killed at this explosion in just a few minutes. Many more died afterward from the over effects. The modern estimates place the number of deaths from World War I and World War II at 69 million military and civilian personnel. More people have been killed in the war in the past 100 years than in all of the other wars in Earth's history combined. So you understand this is being fulfilled, but most of you are recognize that there could not be a World War III. Is this true? If it would, somebody would explode nuclear weapons, somebody would respond with that, and we'd just kill everybody on the planet. So we've had these big wars. But now we have terrorism. Ellen White says that near the end there would be secret plotting to destroy life. Destruction, misery, and death will be seen on every hand. So we have suicide bombing, improvised explosive devices. And then I'm not going to show you a lot of signs except 2 major areas today. There's collateral damages of war are horrendous. More than 4 million refugees have fled from Syria with only what they can carry, most of them without transport. Now, I'm going to give you a little illustration. When Kathy and I first got married, when we first moved to Andrews University, we had everything we owned inside a car. Well, there was barely room for us to sit, I'll have to grant you that. The floors were filled, the back seat was full, the trunk was full, you understand. The last time we moved, when we moved to Washington, D.C., an 18-wheeler moved us. I mean, this is incredible. So I asked you guys yesterday, how many of you think you have stuff in your possession you'd never use again as long as you live? Most everybody raised their hand. But how would you like to move walking and carrying everything you could carry? Now this is something, 4 million refugees have fled from Syria with only what they can carry, and most of them without transport. So there's one vehicle in this picture of thousands of people fleeing Syria. And these are ladies carrying their possessions on their shoulder and their purse, and little children with carrying bags and stuff. It's just, this is a Syrian family in a refugee camp in Turkey. Can you see this little baby's being pushed on the train or a bus or something? Even if his parents don't get on, they want to save his life. It's just incredible. But it's the time when earthquakes and major signs of the end, are, as predicted by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are increasing in frequency and intensity. You guys know about all the earthquakes, so I'm just going to show a couple slides. 250,000 homes were destroyed in Haiti a few years ago. 30,000 commercial buildings collapsed in Haiti. Chile, South America, they had a 9.0 Richter scale earthquake. Their superhighways collapsed, bridges collapsed, crushing cars, and so on. This is incredible. Devastation in Chile in February of 2010. Whole buildings collapsed. Now this is one that's incredible because nowadays with modern technology, people caught these tsunamis coming into Japan on their cell phones. Huge big waves coming over houses. And Kathy, well, I saw a picture on the internet of a commercial fishing boat, like a 60-foot commercial fishing boat, sitting on top of a 5-story building. It was set up there by a tsunami, and they couldn't figure out how to get it down. Now, this is incredible when you think about all these big waves coming crashing in over all the infrastructure along the Japanese coast. Nepal, Chile, and Indonesia have also seen these major things. It's a time of declining moral values. The agenda of the LGBT, there's a bunch of letters that go on after that now for some reason. The community makes the news on a regular basis. Now, as an attorney, I'm going to tell you that there's some interesting things that are happening. In June 26 of 2015, I said it was a very sad day for America because the U.S. Supreme Court issued its ruling in the Obergefell versus Hodges case in a 5-4 decision. There's only 9 justices, so a split decision, as you can understand, but of course the majority declared that it was constitutional, guaranteed to the right of a same-sex marriage. This decision accelerated America down the slippery slope to total disregard for God and His Word. We now have to change we may have to change the inscriptions on our coins and our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, because it is clear that we do not trust in God, neither are we one nation under God. God had nothing to do with this decision. Please understand that. This is by the gable end of the U.S. Supreme Court building, Moses holding the 10 Commandments. This is incredible. And now people are trying to tear out all vestiges of God all over the buildings and so on in Washington, D.C. and other places. This is by order of President Obama, the White House, the People's House, was illuminated with the rainbow colors of the gay rights movement on June 26, 2015, to celebrate the U.S. Supreme Court's decision for making same-sex marriage, I'm saying forcing same-sex marriage on all 50 states. President Obama stated, "We have made our union a little more perfect." I could tell you more about that, but this will be probably sufficient what I'm going to show you. Franklin Graham responded to the Obergefell Supreme Court decision by stating this, just the part underlined: "There is no hope for our nation from any political party, Republican, Democrat, Tea Party, Independent, or other party. The only hope for America is God." And since I wrote the book Sunday's Coming, I understand that this is one of the reasons that people may ask for a Sunday law at some point, because the morals of our country are declining such a terrible way. So this is John Lewis and Stuart Gaffney, the celebrating in San Francisco. And this one is amazing to me because we just had the ASI convention in Houston, Texas about 2 weeks ago, and I was there with Adventist World Radio. The lady in the pink is the mayor of Houston. And she and her wife, Kathy Hubbard, are celebrating the Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage in Houston, Texas. Now, Chief Justice Roberts and the late Justice Antonin Scalia both wrote dissenting opinions. Now, remember, it's a 5-4 decision, that Obergefell case, which is very, very interesting because rarely do all 4 or all of the dissenting justices write an opinion, because it's just dicta. It's not the force of law. Now, most of you understand that several years ago, there was a Proposition 8 in California trying to legalize same-sex marriage. The people of California voted it down. Did you hear what I just said? They didn't want same-sex marriage in California. I was born and raised in California, so I'm just, as liberal as it might be, they voted it down. Does everybody understand that? But the Obergefell case forced them to have same-sex marriage in California and every state of America. So this is just from by the way, all four of the dissenting justices wrote dissenting opinions. So Chief Justice John Roberts wrote, "You can celebrate the availability of new benefits, but do not celebrate the Constitution. It had nothing to do with it. People of faith can take no comfort in the treatment they receive from the majority today." This is his dissenting opinion, part of it. Just as the late Antonin Scalia state, the Supreme Court has become a threat to American democracy. This decision, that's the Obergefell case, robs the people of the most important liberty, the freedom to govern themselves. This is really, really incredible. Well, we'll go on. I mentioned this at the dinner table yesterday to some of the people that I was talking with. We look typically to Daniel and Revelation and Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and so on for end-time signs. But here's one that you might not have thought about before. 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, verses 1 to 7, talks about the type of people that will be living at the end of time. There's like 21 different descriptions of people. It is my personal belief that every one of them are being fulfilled today. So I'm going to read down through them, and you just see if it's not right. So it starts out, 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, "In the last days men will be lovers of themselves," or selfish. So I'm going to tick that one off. "Lovers of money," or greedy. "Boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving." King James Version says, "without natural affection," "unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal." You guys understand what brutal is? You've ever heard of the Geneva Conventions and things that happen in war? The brutal people, like ISIS, not only kill people, they chop their heads off and drag them around with a jeep through town laughing. This is brutal. Does everybody understand brutal? That's what brutal is. "Despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, this transforming power, making captives of women, led away by various lusts, always learning but never able to come to truth." Do these describe our day? It's incredible. It's amazing. Now, it's a time of fulfillment of Revelation 13, a strong vindication of the prophetic interpretation of Seventh-day Adventists, and a major support for the prediction of Ellen G. White. Now, I'm just going to tell you something interesting. I'm going to show you a picture now of a little boat, and I've got some supporting information that I want to share with you about it. Most everybody understands that that's supposed to be a picture of the Mayflower, the little boat that brought people to America. It's interesting that England had separated from the Roman Catholic Church around 1532 in the days of Henry VIII. The split was primarily over the authority of the Pope and not so much doctrinal issues, as you are aware. Henry had become the head of the Church of England, and listen carefully, he executed people who would not recognize him as such. So there was a group of people in England at the time who were called separatists or saints and later called pilgrims. These people did not want to pledge their allegiance to the Church of England, so they believed that it was almost as corrupt and idolatrous as the Catholic Church. So in 1608, a group of these pilgrims moved to Holland seeking religious freedom. After being there about 12 years, they decided to find a home in the New World on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, I want you to understand that it's one thing to take a cruise today on a cruise ship. Hardly feel the water at all, but going on a little boat, a tiny little boat, I'll just tell you about it in a few minutes. The Pilgrims hired a merchant ship called the Speedwell to take them to England, where they would join another ship called the Mayflower, and the two ships were planning to sail together across the Atlantic. The voyage from Holland to England, on which started on July 22, keep these dates in mind, July 22, 1620, the Speedwell developed serious leaks and had to be repaired in England. On August 21, the two ships set sail for America. After sailing 300 miles from England, the Speedwell had also developed such serious safety issues that both ships were forced to turn back. Now, you understand, sailing 300 miles is a big deal. They had to turn around and go all the way back. The Pilgrims had already spent nearly 6 weeks on board the Speedwell, but it was decided to transfer all the people and their supplies to the Mayflower for the trip across the sea. The Mayflower was not a passenger boat. As a matter of fact, 102 people and a crew of about 30 men were on board. The ship was only 90 feet long, which is interesting. Modern cruise ships are 12 times that big. Finally, on September 6th, the heavily loaded Mayflower left England. The long delay in dealing with the Speedwell's issues meant that the Mayflower must now cross the North Atlantic at the height of the stormy season, resulting in a rough and dangerous and uncomfortable passage. Now, it's very interesting to understand that early in the voyage, their fruit and vegetable supply rotted. There was not enough nutrients in their diet. Many of the passengers experienced bleeding gums, rotten teeth, and stinking breath that is associated with scurvy. Their water became polluted, and so liquid was supplied to them in the form of beer. In addition, many of the passengers were horribly seasick. One was swept overboard and was drowned. There were no toilets on board at all. So the people used wooden pots which they dumped overboard. To make matters even worse, there was not enough water for bathing or washing clothes, so the passengers were forced to wear their clothes, the same clothes, for 2 months straight. They did all this seeking religious freedom, getting away from the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England. Does everybody understand that? Now, you're going to be surprised with what I'm going to show you. The crossing took 66 days, and it was not until November that they saw land in what is now known as Cape Cod in Massachusetts. The Pilgrims had been granted rights to settle in Virginia, where they could have farms and properties where they could grow crops and so on, but the storms had blown them far north, where the land was less suitable for plantation settlements, and the weather was much colder. When the Pilgrims landed, there was snow on the ground. It was very cold and too cold for building houses, so most of the people spent the winter on the Mayflower in the harbor. Incredible. It's interesting that during that first winter, nearly half of the people died. All but 53 of the 102 that sailed were dead. It was malnutrition, disease, and exposure to cold weather that took their toll. It's very likely that without the kindness of the Native American people, that none of them would have survived at all. Now, I've told you these details to underscore this important thing: the sacrifice and commitment of these dear people who were seeking civil and religious freedom. They had been hunted, persecuted, imprisoned in Europe, and now those that had survived were free. Amazing. My second illustration is this most significant landmark in Washington, D.C., this big 555-foot tall obelisk called the Washington Monument. Now, it's very interesting that the Washington Monument construction began in 1848, and construction was stopped during the Civil War and other issues. It was finally completed in 1884. This is amazing because it's surrounded by the 50 flags of the states, 50 states. During the construction period, now some of you may not know this, but you can check it out on the internet. It's absolutely true what I'm going to tell you. During the construction period, memorial stones were donated to line the steps on the inside of the monument. Most of you know that it's just a rock veneer on the outside, but if you go inside, there's steps all the way up. When I was a senior in high school, we went to Washington, D.C., and we actually walked up the steps. I mean, that was the way we did it. But nowadays, you take the elevator, and you have to get a ticket and all that. But at any rate, the first several levels, they have these memorial stones on the inside. And I'll show you what there are 190 such stones lined on the inside of the Washington Monument. Here's one from Tennessee. Federal Union, it must be preserved. And then there's one from Colorado, 1876. Believe it or not, even the Cherokee Nation donated a stone. It's very interesting to see all these things. But one of the senders of the memorial stones that were sent to the Washington Monument construction project was one from Pope Pius IX of the Vatican. In 1853, he sent a block of marble from the ancient Temple of Concord in Rome on behalf of the Holy See to be used in this monument. Now, I'll tell you that because of the sacrifice of the Pilgrims and those who laid down their lives in the Revolutionary War to protect freedom, the workers on the monument refused the Pope's stone. They actually broke it in little pieces, took it on a boat out in the middle of the Potomac and dumped it over. It was never used. That was the attitude toward the people who had sought freedom. Do you guys understand what I'm talking about? Freedom. It's not bigotry, it's memory. Do you understand? So it's really amazing. In 1982, during the administration of Ronald Reagan, the Holy See, the Vatican, sent over a replacement stone. I presume that it's now been placed in the monument somewhere, like carved one out and put another in its place. But I couldn't find it on the internet. But at least the original one was broken up in little pieces and sent overseas into the ocean. Actually, the Potomac River is, you can go out to the ocean from there through the Chesapeake Bay and so on. Now, I'm going to show you how things have changed from those days. Through the two great errors, the immortality of the soul and Sunday sacredness, Satan will bring the people under his deceptions. While the former lays the foundation of spiritualism, the latter creates a bond of sympathy with Rome. Now, the part that I've put in gold here that you'll be able to see in the middle is interesting. Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp the hands with the Roman power. And under the influence of this threefold union, this country will follow in the steps of Rome in trampling on the rights of conscience. So we had this situation in 2014. When this was first on the internet, Kenneth Cox called me and said, "Ed, have you seen what's on the internet today?" And he says, "This is the greatest thing I've seen since I've been teaching in the ministry." And this was Tony Palmer. Guys ever heard of Tony Palmer? How many of you? Okay. Anyway, he was speaking to a group of charismatic pastors at the Kenneth Copeland Ministries Conference. And then the Pope, of course, spoke on his little smartphone and so on. But the interesting part was just a few weeks later, Tony Palmer took all of the charismatic pastors who wanted to go to meet the Pope in the Vatican. Most of you are likely aware that Tony Palmer died in a motorcycle accident about 2 weeks after that. But Kenneth Copeland said, not before he built the bridge. Very interesting. Now here's one that's interesting to me, Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen claims that he has the largest church in America, with 52,000 members. They have the former Houston Rockets basketball arena as their main church. But he's a megachurch pastor of Lakewood, Houston, Texas. A group of 14 other religious and political leaders from America met with the Pope on June 5, 2014. Osteen said it was a great honor to represent the pastors of America in meeting with the pontiff. He wasn't representing me. The reason I'm going to tell you that is because the second largest church in America is the 40,000 member of the Saddleback Community Church in Orange County, California, where Rick Warren met with the Pope at the Vatican on November 18. Now this is interesting because remember, the Protestants are going to lead the way by stretching their hands across the Gulf. So I'm going to show you a couple of other points here. This is from USA Today, and it was September 22, 2015. The headline, "Once Shunned, Papal Meetings with American Presidents Now the Norm." Few relationships in U.S. political history have changed more over time than that between presidents and popes. Once avoided, meetings with popes are now obligatory for American presidents. It is a vivid illustration of how the church in the United States have changed over the past 2 centuries. For more than a century after George Washington took the first presidential oath, listen carefully now, for more than a century after George Washington took the first presidential oath of office in 1789, the idea of a president meeting with a pope would have been unthinkable. Things gradually changed. As more immigrants entered the country and Catholics formed large blocks of voters, as relationships between the White House and the Vatican have evolved, popes have been increasingly seen as honest brokers in international diplomacy. Very interesting. And so you have President Obama meeting the you guys all are familiar with the D.C. area, but I will just tell you that there are 3 major airports. There are Dulles International Airport, Baltimore Washington International Airport, and the Ronald Reagan Airport. When the Pope comes, he doesn't come to any one of those 3. He goes to Andrews Air Force Base, as you know. And they send a limousine out his embassy to pick him up, typically. But breaking culture and what was normally happening, the president himself goes out to meet the Pope at Andrews Air Force Base. And they take him to the White House, and then he drives in this American-made Pope mobile with thousands of people. Now, this is the Pope speaking to a joint session of Congress. There's another picture getting a standing ovation. I will just tell you that, in my opinion, this is the greatest fulfillment of Revelation 13 I've seen in my entire life. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. This could have been the only picture I showed you today, but this is amazing. Who would have thought 100 years ago that there would ever be a Pope speaking to a joint session of Congress? Do you understand? It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Here's the Pope speaking from the balcony of the Speaker's office, John Boehner's office, out to this sea of people. I understand you've had Lincoln Steed speak here before. He's the editor of Liberty Magazine. He's been the editor of at least 5 of my books. I write it, and then he puts it in where you can understand it. And anyway, Lincoln Steed got a ticket to go to the inauguration. He thought it was, or the Pope's speech, and he thought somehow he was going to be in the balcony of the House of Representatives, where they had that big meeting. This meeting I just showed you back here. He thought he was going to get in there. But as it turns out, his ticket was to be in one of those little tiny people way out there in Never Land. Because they were very, very scarce to get to see the Pope. Because wherever he went, millions of people were speaking to him. Now I'm going to show you something interesting also. This one is amazing. This is the Pope with his entourage coming in to speak to the United Nations after he was met with the President and spoke to Congress. The most interesting thing is that the United Nations General Assembly had voted on Thursday, September 10, 2015, to allow the Vatican flag at the UN headquarters and the UN offices as a permanent observer. This flag of the Vatican now flies as a permanent fixture at every United Nations facility in the world. Full time. Not just because he was coming that day. Kath and I had the opportunity in June to travel to Europe on a Reformation tour, and our tour went to Geneva, Switzerland. We went by the embassy, and there it was flying. That is the United Nations Embassy office in Europe. Oh, by the way, let me back it up a little bit. Does everybody understand that there's 2 keys on the Vatican's flag? Can you see the 2 keys there? You see the bottom of I'll point them out to you. right here is the end of one, and then it goes out here, and there's the key at this end, this one here. This one is gold, and this one is silver. It's always that way. One is for Peter, one is for Paul. One shows that you are the ruler of the church, and the other one that you're ruler of the world. That's the flag. Very interesting. And then Time magazine, September 28, says the new Roman Empire. This is pretty amazing when you see all these things happening. Millions of people came out to see the Pope. Listen carefully. There is no person on earth that will draw more crowds than the Pope. No rock star, no movie star. Am I telling you guys the truth about this? You saw it. I mean, it's incredible. No one's ever seen anything like it. This is Time magazine's editorial. It's an odd fact of history that the world's youngest empire, the U.S., established diplomatic relations with the oldest, the Holy See, only a little over 30 years ago under Ronald Reagan. Back then, many considered it inappropriate for the champion of church-state separation to engage directly with the world's most far-reaching theocracy. But of course, things have changed. Christianity Today did a little survey, and they posted this on their website on 25th of September, 2015. From Antichrist to brother in Christ, how Protestant pastors view the Pope. A survey of 1,000 Protestant pastors revealed that within a few centuries, the Pope had gone from Antichrist to brother in Christ for a lot of Protestants. So this one is not on that topic at all, but this is President Trump, of course, in his address to the National Prayer Breakfast this past February this year, President Trump made one clear policy declaration. This is from the Washington Post. I will get rid of and totally destroy the Johnson Amendment. Now this is interesting because the Johnson Amendment is not an amendment to the Constitution, as you know. It's an amendment to what? IRS code. And the IRS code means that the way it's written now, if you have a 501c3 charity, you cannot get involved in politics or you lose your tax-exempt status. So he wants that to be taken away so that people in churches can get involved in politics. And a lot of people think this is a opportunity for religious freedom, but it's actually bondage. Everybody should know that anywhere in the country, around the world, where you have politics and religion together, there is always persecution. Did you guys hear what I just said? There is always persecution. By the way, the United States is not a democracy. We would not want a democracy. It's a constitutional republic, which means that we use the democratic process to choose our leaders, but once they're leaders, they're duty-bound to uphold the Constitution. Is that right? Not just enforce the laws they like, but the ones that are on the books, as you know. So here's President Trump meeting with the Pope. Now this is an interesting one because when Melania met the Pope, she made this interesting statement. Here's first Trump's. Honor of a lifetime to meet His Holiness Pope Francis. I leave the Vatican more determined than ever to pursue peace in our world. I do not tweet, but I got this one off the internet. This is one of his tweets. And Melania, do you see FLOTUS there? That's First Lady of the United States. Today, visit with His Holiness the Pope Francis Pontifex is one I'll never forget. I was humbled by the honor. Blessings to all. And then after Melania Trump visited with the Pope, she confirmed that she is herself a Catholic. This is interesting now because Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, was a born and raised Southern Baptist. But he converted to Roman Catholicism on March 29, 2009. So it just happens that his wife Callista has just been recently nominated to be the ambassador to the Vatican. Now I put Vatican here just so people understand where it's going, but it's really not the Vatican, is it? It's the Holy See. This is the central government of the Roman Catholic Church. So this is our Sunday Visitor. This is a Roman Catholic newspaper. It's the largest circulated newspaper of the Catholic Church in America. I've been subscribing to it for a number of years just to find things like this. So June 11 to 17, that week, 2017, on page 18, the Visitor said, President Donald Trump has named Callista Gingrich, the wife of former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, to be the next ambassador to the United States, from the United States to the Holy See. To clarify her title, she will not be an ambassador to the Vatican, referring only to that tiny piece of independent territory surrounding St. Peter's Basilica. Contrary to what some may assume, no ambassador goes to the Vatican City-State. Instead, listen carefully now, 183 sovereign governments send ambassadors to the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Now this is amazing because how many sovereign nations are there in the world? Just about 209. 183 of them have full diplomatic relations with the Vatican. Listen carefully, including all Islamic republics. Very amazing. And to the organization through which the Pope governs, that is the Church, officially called the Holy See. This one is just kind of interesting because it's popular in some places to criticize religious groups. Russia has moved to ban Jehovah's Witnesses as extremists. Most of you are likely aware that there were three groups of people that Hitler annihilated during the genocide in what we call World War II. You remember that situation? You know what they were? Jews, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Those people all lost their lives if they were found. But in His providence, God has called us to be in His work at a time when the gospel is going to all the world. So I'm going to close with some good news. You guys ready for good news? Here it goes. 2015, when we have the most complete documents right now, the Adventist Church baptized 1,260,880 people, or an average of 3,454 new members every day of the week. That's more than a Pentecost every day. That is 24,181 new members every Sabbath. We cannot build churches fast enough to provide for this growth. I want to show you one other thing. Have you ever heard the illustration that the cup is half full or it's half empty? Well, I'm going to tell you it's half full because something amazing is happening. The General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists was organized in 1863 with 3,500 members. Remember, some conferences like the Michigan Conference had already been organized. So the world population at that time was 1.2 billion. So for every Adventist member, there were 342,857 people in the general population that weren't Adventists. 1 to 342,000. Everybody see that ratio? Now this is amazing. And with that ratio, the young people who organized our church decided, we're going to do this. We're going to take the gospel to all the world. We're going to give our lives for this. So in 2017, that's 154 years later, there are now 20.1 million Adventists, with the global population have grown to 7.5 billion people living on the earth. But now the ratio is 1 Adventist for every 373 people worldwide. Can you contact 373 people? Do you understand? Most of us could. This is pretty amazing. That's people in the general population. The current ratio is 919 times better than it was in 1863. Incredible. The gospel is going to all the world in incredible ways. Today, total member involvement is catching on worldwide. More and more people are getting involved. I wrote this book, Battle of the Spirits, because I've talked about the Holy Spirit and the spirit of the devil contrasting in the end times. Most of you likely are aware that something big is going to happen to finish the work, bigger than what I've told you already. And it's described in Revelation 18, where it says there's a light that lightens the whole world, an angel coming down from heaven lightens the whole world. That's describing the latter rain, as you know. And many people think the latter rain is beginning to fall now. It will not come in its fullness till the Sunday law, as you probably are aware. But the amazing thing is this. We're told that the latter rain will be poured out, and some people won't have a clue it's even happening. I wouldn't want it to miss me, would you? Now this is pretty important. 113,000 evangelistic meetings are planned for this 2017 by our church around the world. 4,300 evangelistic meetings were finished this past March in Eastern Europe. The countries of Romania, Armenia, Bulgaria, Russia, Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine, and Russia were involved. This followed months of prayer and Bible work. This is something I'm very excited about. This is the new logo of Adventist World Radio. Since Dwayne McKee came, he's gotten really interested in evangelism. So he says, Evangelism 360, we're bringing people full circle back to the church. Broadcast to baptism. So Adventist World Radio has decided we're not just going to entertain people with 30-minute programs around the world in their own language. We're going to actually bring them to Christ and get them ready for baptism. So there's also planning now for an intentional evangelism, an international Bible school, so people can study the Bible like my parents did the Voice of Prophecy lessons, you understand. Groundwork for public meetings. So they just recently held meetings in the Philippines, and they were using FM there in some of the cities, and 4 of the FM radio stations broadcast 2 hours a day advertising the meetings. And when the meetings opened, there were people standing in line to get into the church. Amazing, really amazing. Incredible things are happening. I told you last night, so I'm going to share this with you. If I could find it, I'm sure I have it somewhere here. I think I have it on this side. Did I tell you that when the Lord sees that the time is running out and that the work has not been finished, that He will send angels to do the work that men might have had the privilege of doing? Remember me reading that to you last night? Well, let me read you a little story. I just got this from the General Conference, Adventist World Radio. It's on their stationery. And it says, a Seventh-day Adventist pastor was asked to come to a home in a city where Christians were being persecuted by Islam. Very interesting. When he arrived at the home, he discovered to his amazement that he had been invited to the home of a Muslim imam. He was immediately fearful for his life, but was impressed to knock at the door anyway. When he was invited in, only to discover that he was not the only imam, was not the only one home, but there were 30 other Muslim men there as well. Of course, now he was very nervous. And then this imam amazingly asked him the question, Can you baptize us in secret, a secret place? After collecting his thoughts, the pastor blurted out, but wait, how do I know if you're ready? Kathy and I have a couple that we've been studying with. They want to be baptized right away, but we've gone through the whole It Is Written series of Bible studies with them, and they're going to be baptized on the 16th of September. It was about 3 weeks from now, I think. Anyway, we're planning an outdoor baptism. I should tell you about this. We don't have a baptistry in our church, but we still baptize people. Because in Tennessee, there's lots of Baptist churches. So the state park there has a baptistry in the lake with steps that go down into it and everything, beautiful clear water, sandy bottom, and so on. And the Baptists line up to use it on Sunday, but when we reserve it for Sabbath, there's no problem. We can just have a lot of baptisms there. So we'll probably have 5 people baptized in 3 weeks from our little church. But anyway, let me go on. So these people wanted to be baptized, but we said, you need to know what the church teaches. So we went through the Bible lessons with them. Many of you have done this too. So the Imam responded very seriously and with sacred awe, replied, for several months an angel has come each evening and instructed me in the teachings of the Bible. The Imam in turn had taught these men who were in the room with him. When the group was quizzed by the pastor, it was discovered that they indeed were well-grounded in the teachings of the Adventist Church, and the pastor baptized the entire group. Incredible, in secret. Angels. Oh, I should tell you one other one. Is it okay if I share one other one with you? A family recently made their way as missionaries to a dense mountainous jungle of the Philippines, only to discover after that their arrival had been announced by dreams given to the village chiefs. When Pastor Tim started to hold evangelistic meetings, more people had dreams telling others of several areas, villages, to come to the meetings. Many Muslims are being given dreams of a man in white who tells them that the Seventh Adventist Church has the truth for the last days. This man in white is identified as Jesus Christ when they learn the truths of Scripture. In a Muslim country, a pastor hired a large billboard and put an ad on it. If you've had a dream of a man in white, please call this number. And he received more than 100 phone calls from Muslims reaching for truth. Awesome stuff is happening. Let's go on here. This is a picture of, as I showed you last night, or the last time I presented, of your brothers and sisters around the world. This is a Nathan Green picture, of course, of people of many faiths. But are you glad that there's a cosmopolitan group that are becoming Seventh Adventists? Because the Bible says the gospel is going to every kindred, tongue, and people around the world. They're our brothers and sisters, and we should be willing to sacrifice for them. So I'm going to go on just quickly here. God calls people with less than ideal backgrounds. It is God's plan to employ humble instruments to accomplish great results. And I feel that way for most of us. I know Tim has a real impressive story. Who would have ever guessed that a young boy that was raised in a logging family would ever come to work at the General Conference or become a lawyer or anything like that? It's just incredible. The glory of God will not be given to men, but to him who works through them and willing to do his own good pleasure. So God will do the work if we furnish him the instruments. We really don't have to worry about the success of the program because God will promise the success for us. I'm going to get a book and lay on my notes so they don't fly away here in the wind. Are you guys glad that we have a little breeze coming through here? If it was warmer, it'd be better, wouldn't it? Come to Tennessee, you'll get some warm air there. Okay. God expects us to do what we can in preparation for his supernatural acts. In Esther's case, in anticipation of her visit with the king to intercede for her people, she made some special preparation. In fact, she made physical, mental, and spiritual preparation. I'm glad that Dr. Tim mentioned the health message this morning. I will this evening as well. It is very, very important that we understand that God gave us the health message not as a restriction, but as a benefit to us individually so that we have sharp minds and keen intellect so we can share the gospel with people. Does that make sense? And by the way, so many people need the message that we have. So, our challenge in this crisis hour of Earth's history is far too great to be attempted in human strength alone. To be God's will, we must communicate. To be in God's will, we must be willing to commune with him in prayer and listen to him through the reading of his word. Then people will be able to tell that we have been with Jesus. We will have the testimony of what Jesus means to us. Another picture of success is what Esther learned to keep focused on the big picture. Now, you can focus a lot on the goofy stuff that happens to your car breaking down and all this kind of stuff, but the big picture is that Jesus is coming soon and we want to be ready. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life is not of the world, but is not of the Father, but is of the world. Now I'm going to show you something interesting. Most everybody that where we've lived recently has a garbage plan where you get out recyclable stuff. like the plastic and the glass or the tin cans or whatever. I believe in recycling. I believe in keeping my yard clean and everything looking nice and so on, and trash in the right receptacles. But listen carefully. We are not going to save the planet. The Bible says the world is passing away and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. So you want to be saved? Get with God. That's the point. Jesus asked these soul-searching questions on the big picture. What would it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? So I have some questions I'm going to show you that we're going to go right to the end. These are some sad things that are happening, going to be happening. Maybe I should tell you what these are, what we can see ahead. Where's our leaders here? Can I go 5 more minutes? Do you think okay, we're going to do it. I got the thumbs up from the right guy, so. The end of religious liberty in the United States, really interesting. The law of God through the agency of Satan is to be made void. In our land of boasted freedom, religious liberty will come to an end. The conquest will be decided over the Sabbath question, which will agitate the whole world. Now, this is interesting. Those who honor the Bible Sabbath will be denounced as enemies of law and order and breaking down the moral constraints of society, causing anarchy and corruption and calling down the judgments of God upon the earth. Their conscientious scruples will be pronounced obstinacy, stubbornness, and contempt of authority. They will be accused of disaffection toward the government. You can imagine what that will be like. The persecution by the Protestants, by Romanism, by which the religion of Jesus Christ was almost annihilated, will be more than rivaled when Protestantism and popery are combined. That's Last Day Events 147. Now I want to share with you, as defenders of the truth refuse to honor the Bible Sabbath or Sunday Sabbath, some of them will be thrust into prison, some will be exiled, some will be treated as slaves. To human wisdom, all of this now seems impossible. But as the restraining spirit of God shall be withdrawn from men, and they shall be under the control of Satan, who hates the divine precepts, there will be strange developments. The heart can be very cruel when God's fear and love are removed. Now, here's another one. This is Third Selected Messages, 397. It's Last Day Events, page 150. Many will be imprisoned. Many will flee for their lives from cities and towns. Many will be martyrs for Christ's sake in standing for defense of truth. Well, there's much more we could say. We talked about buying and selling yesterday. The only way in which men will be able to stand firm in the conflict is to be rooted and grounded in Christ. That's Last Day Events 151. Now, there's two final statements I want to show you, and these are pretty interesting to me. God also has his agents among the leading men of the nation. When the final warning shall be given, it will arrest the attention of these leading men through whom the Lord is now working, and some of them will accept it and will stand with the people of God through the time of trouble. That is amazing to me. And then most of us have people that have strayed from the fold, so I will read this one. When the storm of persecution really breaks upon us, the true sheep will hear the true shepherd's voice. Self-denying efforts will be put forth to save the lost, and many who have strayed from the fold will come back to follow the great shepherd. Is that good news? Probably everyone here has relatives that have strayed from the faith. In view of the common peril, strife for supremacy will cease, and there will be no disputing as to who shall be accounted the greatest. So I just have 2 slides to close. The rewards of looking at the big picture are awesome. You may never climb Mount Whitney, which is the tallest mountain in the 48 states, hike the entire Appalachian Trail, 2,150 miles, write a book, visit the Holy Land, or fly your own airplane. But if you enter heaven, your life is a success, and there is no question about that. On the other hand, you might become wealthy by the world's standards, you might become highly educated, earn the praise of men, compete in the Olympic Games. But if you miss heaven, your life is a failure, and there is no question about that either. So we're going to talk about something very amazing. You can just share this one. I keep telling this is my last slide, but this is going to be it for sure. Just to appeal from Lessons of Esther, remember that in God's big picture, things don't just happen. God has a plan for you, and you are a part of it, every one of us. Recognize that you've been called for such a time as this, the very time of the end. Commit to become personally involved. God can use anyone who's willing, and our success is based on his power. Decide what you can do to prepare for God's supernatural acts, and then keep your eyes fixed on the big picture, the long view in mind. Heaven is our goal, isn't it? Okay, we're going to sing a song to close, but before we sing it, it's 604 in the hymnal, and I had memorized what the title was. We know not the hour. We don't know the hour. But the interesting part about all of this is that God knows the hour, and he knows that it's short. He's been trying to tell us. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you'd like to be ready when Jesus comes back again. Praise the Lord. We'll have a time to commit ourselves to the Lord tonight. You all come on up there.